The sun shone gently over the small outdoor wedding, where flower petals danced in the wind and guests gathered with polite smiles. Naria stood in a stunning white gown, her deep brown skin glowing against the ivory fabric. Her eyes sparkled, not just with excitement, but with silent prayers for peace. Beside her stood Ethan, tall, kind-eyed, and proud to call this African village girl his wife. But in the crowd, one face remained stone cold: Judith, Ethan's mother. She wore pearls and a forced smile, but her eyes held nothing but cold judgment. Naria had come from the humble village of Ubali, a place full of warmth, stories, and tradition. She was known there for her kindness, her gentle voice, and her habit of helping others even when she had little herself. When Ethan, a white American doctor, came to volunteer at the local clinic, he was instantly struck by her compassion. She helped translate for him, walked miles with him to see patients, and never asked for anything in return. Slowly, their bond grew, not just over medicine, but over laughter, shared meals, and late-night talks under the stars. Ethan fell in love first, and when he confessed it, Naria hesitated. She knew the world outside Ubali would not be kind to a love like theirs, but Ethan promised to stand by her, to protect her, to build a life together beyond borders. Eventually, Naria said yes. But from the beginning, Ethan's family, especially his mother, made it clear they were not thrilled. Judith believed her son was being taken advantage of, that this girl from a faraway land was after his money, his passport, his name. Despite the tension, Ethan insisted on having their wedding in Ubali, among the people who raised Naria. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with singing, dancing, and heartfelt blessings. But Judith remained stiff, barely clapping, barely looking at the bride. When the vows ended and the guests applauded, Judith stepped close to Naria, her voice low and sharp. "You may have fooled my son," she whispered with a fake smile, "but you'll never be part of this family." For a moment, the words cut deep. Naria's heart stung, her hands trembled. But then, she looked Judith in the eye with quiet strength. A single tear slipped down her cheek, but her voice remained steady as she replied, "Time will tell, mother." Then she turned away, walking into her new life with Ethan, unaware of the storms that were about to come. And Judith? She stood frozen, not knowing that one day she would be the one begging for this girl's forgiveness. When Naria stepped off the plane in Boston, the air felt cold, not just from the weather, but from the weight of everything she was walking into. She held Ethan's hand tightly, her eyes wide with wonder and nerves. This was supposed to be the beginning of a beautiful new chapter, but what awaited her was far from the dream she had imagined. The first shock came when Judith met them at the airport, with a stiff hug for Ethan and a blank stare for Naria. There were no warm words, no welcome signs, no family dinner waiting at home. Instead, Judith coldly informed them that her house didn't have enough space for a couple. Ethan looked surprised, but Naria stayed silent. They ended up in a small, worn-down apartment Ethan found last minute. It was a far cry from the cozy home Naria imagined she'd be building with her new husband, but she didn't complain. She lit candles to make it feel warm, cooked African dishes for Ethan, and tried to settle into her new life. But outside those apartment walls, things were harder. The neighbors gave her curious stares. Some smiled politely, but most avoided eye contact. A few children pointed at her skin and asked loud, innocent questions their parents didn't correct. In stores, people either ignored her or followed her too closely. At family gatherings, Ethan's cousins and aunts gave her tight-lipped smiles and asked loaded questions like, "So, how did you two meet?" Or, "What was it like growing up over there?" Naria always answered with grace, but she could feel the quiet judgment in every word, every glance. What hurt the most was that Ethan didn't seem to see it. He loved her deeply, always hugged her after a long day, and told her how proud he was. But he missed the way his relatives looked at her, the awkward silences when she entered the room, the way conversations shifted around her. And he definitely didn't know that Judith was working behind the scenes like poison in water. She would call relatives and say things like, "She's just using Ethan, can't you see?" Or, "She came from a poor village, and now suddenly she's living in America. How convenient." She'd whisper that Naria was a gold digger, that she had trapped Ethan into marriage. Naria heard whispers, noticed people pulling back, felt the walls closing in. She didn't confront anyone. Instead, she held her head high, swept the apartment floors, and waited. She remembered what she said on her wedding day, "Time will tell." And though her heart felt bruised, she believed it. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that truth always rises, and love, real love, had a power no lie could ever destroy. In the weeks that followed, Naria poured her heart into trying to be accepted. Every morning, she woke up with hope that today might be the day Judith would smile at her, maybe even thank her. She began making efforts beyond anyone's expectations. She cooked warm African dishes and carried them to Judith's home in neat little containers, hoping to share a piece of her culture. The smell of spices filled the kitchen, rich and comforting, but Judith wrinkled her nose the moment she opened the lid. "This is too spicy," Judith said sharply, pushing the plate away. "Our stomachs aren't used to all this grease." Naria smiled weakly and said nothing. The next day, she tried again, this time with a simple American pie recipe she found online. She stayed up late in their small apartment, flour in her hair and fingers sore, but she managed to get it right. She placed the pie gently in a box and brought it over to Judith's house with a hopeful heart. But Judith barely tasted it before saying, "It's too sweet, not like how we make it. Maybe don't try so hard, dear." Still, Naria didn't give up. She bought small gifts, scarves, flowers, candles Judith might like. She complimented Judith's jewelry, offered to help around the house, and even tried calling her mom a few times, though it felt awkward on her tongue. No matter how hard she tried, it was never enough. Judith's eyes stayed cold, her tone clipped, her smile never real. Ethan, meanwhile, tried to play peacemaker. He'd hug Naria after a long day and tell her Judith just needed time. "She's old-fashioned," he'd say, "but deep down she'll come around." Naria wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that kindness would melt even the hardest hearts. But what Ethan didn't see was the quiet war happening behind his back. Judith would smile in front of him, then slam doors behind him. She would offer Naria tea, then insult her once Ethan left the room. One evening, Naria arrived early to Judith's house, hoping to surprise her with a new recipe. As she stepped into the hallway, she heard Judith's voice from the living room. She was on the phone, her tone sharp and full of venom. "I'm telling you," Judith said, "she's only here for the passport. That's all she wants. Once she gets it, she'll be gone." Naria froze. The words stabbed through her like cold steel. Her hands, still holding a warm container of stew, trembled. She quietly backed out of the house, heart pounding. For the first time, she realized just how deep Judith's hatred ran. Not just cold shoulders and snide comments, but true, rooted contempt. And the worst part, Ethan had no idea. Naria sat by the window of their small apartment, staring out at the cloudy sky. Inside her chest, it felt like a storm was building. She didn't cry, not even when no one was watching, but the weight she carried inside her was heavy. Every word Judith had said, every cold stare, every lie whispered behind her back, it all began to wear her down. She started questioning everything. Did I come here for love? Or was I just fooling myself? Do I even belong here? Am I truly enough for Ethan? She tried to hide her pain from Ethan, smiling when he came home, listening to him talk about work, cooking his favorite meals, but her silence spoke louder than words. And one night, when he fell asleep beside her, she quietly picked up her phone and called her mother back in Ubali. Her mother's voice was calm, full of warmth and wisdom, like the sun after a long rain. "Dignity is not given, my daughter," her mother said gently. "It is shown in how you carry pain, in how you rise when others expect you to fall." Those words stayed with Naria like a lantern in the dark. The next morning, she woke up early and took a brave step. She applied for a job at a nearby hospital. She had studied nursing in Africa, but never got the chance to use her skills in America. To her surprise, they called her in for a short interview. Within days, she was hired as a nurse assistant. The hospital became her second home. Patients loved her instantly. Her soft voice, gentle hands, and sincere care made her stand out. Elderly patients smiled more when she walked into their rooms. Children held her hand without fear. Even the doctors and senior nurses started praising her. Slowly, her confidence began to return. She felt useful. She felt seen, not as a foreigner, not as the African girl, but as someone who mattered. But Judith noticed too, and she didn't like it. The praise Naria received only fueled Judith's anger. She couldn't stand that Naria was winning hearts in a place where she had hoped she'd break down, so she took her bitterness a step further. One day she told a friend at her church group that Naria had been seen taking medication from the hospital's supply closet. The rumor spread like wildfire, quiet whispers at first, then louder conversations in corners. curious eyes watching Naria during her shifts. Naria didn't know where it came from. She just felt the sudden chill around her. People who used to greet her warmly now acted strange. Some patients grew distant. One nurse even asked her, "Hey, is everything okay with you? There's been talk." Naria's heart began to pound again, not from fear this time, but from a fire starting to light inside her. She had come too far to let lies define her. The storm inside her heart was still there, but now it was starting to turn into strength. The hospital felt colder than ever that day. Naria had just finished helping an elderly patient back into bed when two security officers approached her in the hallway. One of them asked her to come with them, quietly and calmly. Confused and nervous, she followed them into a small office, her heart beating fast. Inside, the head nurse sat with a folder open in front of her. "There's been a report," the nurse said, without looking Naria in the eye. "Someone accused you of stealing money from a patient's locker." Naria's eyes widened in shock. "What? I would never—" The security officer raised a hand gently. "We're not accusing, but we have to investigate." Words spread quickly, and just like that, Naria's warm smiles were returned with suspicion. People whispered when she passed. Her favorite patients didn't meet her gaze, and though the hospital couldn't find any real proof, they told her she had to be suspended until the case was reviewed. She sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, trying not to cry. But inside, her heart shattered. She knew this wasn't just bad luck. This was Judith. When she got home, Ethan was already there. She expected him to hug her, to tell her everything would be okay. But instead, he looked distant, worried, confused. "I got a call from someone at the hospital," he said slowly. "They said you've been suspended. And Mum, she said she warned me about this." Naria stared at him in disbelief. "You think I did it?" "I don't know what to think." Ethan raised his voice, then quickly lowered it. "I love you, Naria, but why is this happening? Why do these things keep coming up?" Her hands trembled as she stepped back. "You promised to protect me," she said softly, her voice cracking. "You said I'd never be alone, but I've never felt lonelier in my life, not even when I was a child back in Ubali." Tears rolled down her face as Ethan reached out, but she turned away. She picked up her jacket and walked out the door, into the pouring rain. The cold drops soaked her hair, her clothes, but she didn't care. She walked without direction, letting her feet lead her through unfamiliar streets. Memories of Ubali flooded her mind, her mother's warm hands, the dusty road she used to walk barefoot, the laughter of neighbors during the evening fires. Life was hard back then, but it was simple, and it was honest. She had never felt like a stranger in her own skin. Now, in this foreign land, surrounded by cold stares and fake smiles, even love felt uncertain. She stood under a flickering streetlight, rain dripping from her chin, wondering how much more her heart could take before it finally broke. During her suspension, instead of staying home and drowning in sadness, Naria found strength in giving. She volunteered at a small community shelter near their apartment. It was a humble place, with creaky floors and worn-out furniture, but it was filled with warm hearts and kind faces. Here, no one looked at her skin. No one asked where she came from. They only saw her gentle hands, her calm voice, her willingness to help. One rainy evening, while helping serve dinner, an elderly woman collapsed right beside the soup line. Panic spread across the room. Everyone froze, except Naria. She rushed to the woman's side and quickly checked her pulse. The signs were clear: heart failure. There wasn't time to wait for an ambulance. In that moment, something inside her took over. She remembered the herbs her grandmother used to carry in Ubali, how she crushed the leaves between her fingers and placed them under the tongue to calm the heart. Naria reached into her tote bag. She had kept a small bundle of those herbs with her, almost like a memory. She gently administered them while keeping the woman's head elevated. By the time the paramedics arrived, the woman was breathing again, weak, but alive. Later that night, as Naria checked on her in the hospital room, the woman opened her eyes and whispered, "You saved my life, child." Naria smiled. "I'm just glad you're okay." The woman introduced herself softly. "My name is Clara. Clara Hastings Naria." Paused. That name sounded familiar. When Ethan came to pick her up that night, and Naria mentioned the name, he froze. "Wait, Clara Hastings? That's my mum's aunt. She was disowned by the family for marrying a black man in the 70s. I thought she'd moved to another state or something." The truth clicked in Naria's mind like thunder. The woman she had saved was none other than Judith's estranged aunt. The next day, Clara requested to meet Naria again. With tears in her eyes, she held her hand and said, "I heard what Judith did to you. I know her heart. She hasn't changed since the day she turned her back on me. But you remind me of why I fought so hard all those years." Clara invited Naria to visit her often, and slowly, Naria began to feel something she hadn't felt in months: hope. Not everyone in Ethan's family was poisoned by prejudice. There was still light, still truth, still justice. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing: the storm might not be over, but she wasn't alone anymore. One sunny afternoon, Miss Clara made a call that would change everything. Her voice trembled just enough to sound convincing. "Judith, I need to see you. I'm not feeling well." The bait was set. Judith, curious and slightly guilty after hearing her aunt was still alive, and worse, that she'd been helped by that girl, decided to come. She didn't expect what she was walking into. When she stepped into Clara's cozy little living room, her eyes fell on a scene that made her freeze. Naria was gently brushing Clara's hair, smiling softly, her hands careful and kind. A warm cup of herbal tea sat on the side table. The room smelled of lavender and home-cooked stew. Judith's lips tightened. "You?" she hissed. Naria stood quietly, respectful, but this time her eyes didn't drop. She looked right at Judith, not with anger, but with strength. Before Judith could throw a single insult, Clara raised her voice. "Sit down, Judith." Judith blinked. Clara rarely raised her voice. She obeyed, reluctantly. "I wanted you to see what love looks like, what grace feels like," Clara began, her voice firm, no longer weak. "This young woman you treat like dirt saved my life, not just with her hands, but with her heart, and you call her a gold digger." Judith looked away, uncomfortable. Clara didn't stop. "I've kept quiet for decades, watched you turn into the same bitter person who disowned me for loving someone with dark skin. Watched you lie about people, ruin good moments, chase appearances while your soul shriveled." Judith gasped. "That's not true." "It is true," Clara snapped. "I was there when you tore up Mum's photo because she hugged my husband. I was there when you laughed at the girl who got kicked out of prom because of her skin. And now here you are, doing the same thing to Naria. The cycle never broke." Judith's face turned pale. Clara turned to Naria, placing a hand on hers. "Don't let this woman steal your light. You are everything she's not, and that scares her." Judith stood up, eyes wide and furious, her words lost in the storm of truth that had just hit her. She couldn't say anything, not one word. She stormed out, her heels clicking on the wooden floor, the door slamming behind her like the final chapter of an old book. Naria stood still, heart pounding, unsure of what had just happened. But then Clara smiled and said, "That, my dear, was the sound of a lie finally meeting the truth." And in that moment, Naria felt something lift off her shoulders. Not all battles are won with swords. Some are won by simply standing in the light. The truth couldn't stay hidden forever. Ethan started to piece it all together, slowly but surely. It began when he noticed the strange tension around him, at work, at home, in every corner of his life. His friends started whispering about Naria, telling him about the rumors his mother had been spreading. The things she'd said about Naria were ugly, hurtful, and completely false. He thought back to everything, how Naria had been treated, the whispers behind her back, the sabotage at work. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. One evening, after weeks of silence, Ethan finally confronted Judith. His face was pale, his hands shaking with the rawness of his emotions. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, but he had to know the truth. He stood in front of her, no longer the son she knew, but the man who loved his wife more than his mother's approval. "You didn't lose me to her," Ethan said, his voice steady, yet filled with pain. "You lost me to your hate." Judith opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She wasn't ready for the confrontation, the years of manipulation, of control, all unraveling before her eyes. She could see the hurt in Ethan's eyes, finally realizing what she had done. Ethan turned away from his mother, his heart heavy with the weight of the betrayal. He couldn't look at her anymore, couldn't bear to be the son she'd twisted into a pawn. He knew what he had to do. Later that night, he stood outside their apartment, his fists clenched as he prepared himself to face Naria. She'd always been strong, always so graceful despite everything. He had failed her, and he hated himself for it. When Naria opened the door, her eyes were guarded, still weary from the fight they'd had days before. "Ethan," she said, her voice quiet, "what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," he whispered, stepping forward. He could barely look her in the eyes. "I've been a fool. I've let my mother's hatred come between us, and I'm so sorry." He paused, his chest tightening with guilt. "I didn't protect you, but I will now. Forever." His words hung in the air. A confession, a plea, a promise. But Naria's eyes were still unsure. Her heart too hurt to simply accept the apology. She took a deep breath, then looked him straight in the eyes. "Love isn't words, Ethan. It's courage." Ethan's heart sank as he realized the truth in her words. He had been blind, only seeing what he wanted to see, but now he understood. He had to show her courage. He had to prove that he wasn't just apologizing, but that he was willing to fight for her, for their future. His love had to be more than just words. It had to be actions. He nodded slowly, determined. "I'll show you. I'll show you every day, Naria. That's a promise." Naria stood there, the storm in her heart starting to calm. There was hope in his eyes now, but she knew one thing for sure. This time, love would have to be more than just words. It would need to be real, proven through action. She was ready to see if he could truly prove it. It was a cold winter evening when the phone call came. Judith had been in a car accident. The impact had broken her hip, and she was rushed to the hospital. Her friends, the ones she had always relied on, abandoned her as soon as they heard the news. They couldn't bear to be around her, especially after everything that had happened. Judith was left alone, helpless, in a world that suddenly felt too quiet. But then, there was a knock on the door. It was Naria. Despite all the bitterness, the cruelty, and the lies Judith had thrown at her, Naria was there. She didn't need to say a word. Naria simply stepped into the house, quietly taking control of the situation, her presence calming the storm that had been raging between them for months. Judith tried to resist, to push her away, to make her leave. She didn't want Naria's help, not after everything she had done, but Naria was persistent in the gentlest of ways. She handled Judith with the care of someone who had been trained in empathy, in love. She helped her into bed, gave her medicine, made her soup, and sat with her as she rested. Every day, she tended to Judith's wounds with a soft smile, her patience never wavering. As the weeks passed, Judith grew weaker, and Naria's care became more vital than ever. Judith's body healed, but it was her heart that started to change. She couldn't ignore it anymore. The kindness that Naria gave without question, without hesitation. She began to feel something she hadn't in years, gratitude. It wasn't easy for her to admit it, but she was slowly being won over by the very woman she had once despised. One evening, as Naria helped her sit up in bed, Judith could no longer hold back the tears that had been building. The vulnerability in her voice cracked through years of pride and bitterness. She whispered, "Why would you help someone who hated you?" The question hung in the air, raw and honest, as Judith's sobs filled the room. It was a question that spoke of regret, of brokenness, and of a life lived with walls too high to climb. Naria, who had witnessed so much pain and judgment, simply sat beside her. She didn't speak for a moment, letting Judith's tears flow freely. Then, with a soft and steady voice, Naria answered, "Because love is louder than hate." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything she had been through, everything she had endured. Love, she knew, had the power to heal wounds deeper than any hatred could ever cut. Judith, in her quietest moment of vulnerability, finally understood. It wasn't the way she had lived her life that mattered anymore. It was how she would live now, and Naria had just shown her the way. In that moment, something inside Judith shifted. The woman she had been for so long, the woman filled with anger, pride, and fear, began to fade, and in her place, a new understanding was born, one that would take time to fully bloom, but would forever be shaped by the love she had received from the one person she had wronged the most. It was a beautiful evening when everything changed. The family had gathered for dinner, a quiet moment of togetherness that seemed ordinary at first. But this time, there was an undeniable tension in the air. Something had shifted. Judith, who had spent so much of her life holding on to her pride, stood up suddenly, her hands shaking as she held the glass of water in front of her. The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward her. Ethan, Naria, and even the extended family, who had witnessed so much conflict, waited for her words. Judith took a deep breath, the weight of everything she had done crashing down on her. The guilt, the shame, and the regret were too much to carry any longer. In front of everyone, she turned to Naria, her voice breaking the silence. "I judged you by your skin, not your soul," Judith admitted, her voice trembling with the emotion she had held back for so long. "I was wrong. I've been wrong about so many things." The room was stunned. No one had expected this from Judith. the woman who had once declared that Naria would never be a part of their family. But here she was, apologizing, acknowledging the hurt she had caused. The years of judgment, the cruelty, the bitterness, all unraveling in a single moment. Naria's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of relief. She had always known that beneath Judith's hardened exterior, there was a woman capable of change. As Judith stepped forward, she reached out to Naria, wrapping her in a warm embrace. The years of animosity, the battles they had fought, all seemed to melt away in that moment. The family watched, witnessing the beginning of a new chapter, one built on understanding and forgiveness. Ethan, who had been standing nearby, was moved to tears. He walked over to Naria and took her hand. Together they stood in front of everyone, renewing their vows, the promises they had made all those years ago, but this time, with an unspoken understanding that had taken time, patience, and love to build. Judith, standing by their side, held the bouquet that Naria had carefully arranged herself. It was a symbol of the new life they were all about to begin. A life without hate, a life bound by love, regardless of the color of their skin. As the camera zoomed out, the video ended with a powerful quote on the screen. "The color of our skin is just a cover. The story of our hearts is what makes us family." It was a statement that captured the heart of their journey, one that would forever resonate with anyone who had ever faced prejudice, hatred, or the struggle to. In that moment, they were no longer just a family. They were a family reborn, bound not by blood or race, but by the love that had transformed them. If this story touched your heart, if you felt the pain, the struggle, and the triumph of love over hate, then I ask you to share it with others. Share it with someone who needs to hear that no matter where we come from or what we look like, love and kindness are the forces that truly unite us. The journey of Naria and Ethan teaches us that humanity is more than just a color. It's the goodness we carry inside, the strength to forgive, and the power to rise above prejudice. Let this story be a reminder that love always has the power to heal, to change, and to bring us together, even when the world around us tries to tear us apart. If you believe in the message of love, empathy, and transformation, please like this video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us, and it allows us to continue sharing stories that inspire and uplift. Thank you for being a part of this journey with us. Together, we can make the world a more loving place. Keep spreading kindness, and remember, love truly does conquer all.